She said it right there over the freshest dirt in the whole of Riverside Memorial Cemetery, while some of the mourners were still folding their umbrellas. Leaned close enough that I could smell her perfume through the rain, and told me I had 72 hours to pack my belongings. Not a question. Not even a request. A deadline. My wife Eleanor had been in the ground for less than 20 minutes. I didn't answer her. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this. The silence I gave Brooke Hargrove Okafor in that cemetery wasn't the silence of a broken old man with nowhere left to go. It was the silence of a man who was already counting, already calculating, already waking something up that had been asleep for 15 years and hadn't forgotten a single thing. I need to tell you all of it, because this story doesn't belong to me alone. It belongs to Eleanor, first and most completely, and she spent the last 2 years of her life making sure of that. My name is Leonard Okafor. I am 71 years old. I have silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, and I walk with a slight hitch in my left hip from an old running injury. I live in a modest house on Delaney Street in Houston's 3rd Ward, and for the past 15 years I have been known in my neighborhood as a gentle, quiet, slightly forgetful retired man who used to work the postal route on the north side. I tend tomatoes. I drink black coffee on the porch in the mornings. I wave at my neighbor Gerald when he drives past in his ancient pickup truck. I am nobody's idea of a threat. That was entirely the point. Before the cardigan and the orthopedic shoes, before the post office and the gentle reputation, I spent 17 years as a senior intelligence analyst for the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. I tracked money laundering operations through 14 layers of shell documentation. I dismantled wire fraud syndicates operating across 4 countries. My security clearance level was classified. In the department, I had a nickname the Auditor earned quietly over a career spent following the trail of dirty money to wherever it went, no matter how deep, no matter how many locked doors were in the way. I walked away in my early 50s. Our son Marcus had been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune condition. He needed a father who came home. The federal government couldn't offer that. So I offered myself instead, traded a classified badge for a mailbag, and put the Auditor away in a box where he'd been resting ever since. He was awake now. He'd been awake since the cemetery. Brooke Hargrove Okafor, the woman my son Marcus married 4 years ago, had miscalculated in the specific, irreversible way that arrogant people miscalculate. She had looked at me, and she had seen exactly what I allowed the world to see, a quiet old man of no consequence. She had never once considered the possibility that the disguise was deliberate. She had never stopped to ask why a man of my background, my history, my particular kind of stillness, would choose to spend his retirement looking like someone the world could safely ignore. She thought she knew me. She didn't know the first thing. The rain had been falling since dawn on that November morning in Houston. The kind of rain that doesn't rush, it just arrives and stays, heavy and gray, like it has nowhere better to be. Leonard stood at the edge of Eleanor's grave in his best black coat, his hands clasped in front of him, not moving. Around him, the 100 or so mourners who had gathered at Riverside Memorial were beginning to filter away. Friends, church members, former colleagues from Eleanor's 30 years of teaching high school English on the north side of the city. They paused to squeeze his arm, to whisper condolences, to press his hand between both of theirs. He thanked each one with a quiet nod. Brooke Hargrove Okafor materialized behind him like a headache, expensive and unwelcome. She was 36, polished to a high shine, wearing a black designer ensemble that had clearly not been purchased for a funeral and had been pressed within an inch of its life. Her blonde hair was pulled back under a wide-brimmed hat that kept the rain off her perfectly. She hadn't cried once during the service. Not once. I had noticed. Leonard. Her voice was the temperature of a corporate filing cabinet. We need to discuss logistics. I didn't turn around. The assisted living facility in Sugarland has an available unit. Standard care level, nothing excessive. Marcus and I have already spoken with the intake coordinator. The transport van can be there Monday morning. She paused. I'd suggest you begin sorting your personal items tonight. Sentimental things, obviously. Everything else can go to the estate sale. Estate sale. 2 words. Eleanor hadn't been gone an hour. I kept my eyes on the headstone. I did not move. I did not respond. Inside my chest, something ancient and precise was clicking into place, the way an old lock responds to the right key after years of sitting dormant. I didn't answer her. I let the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable, then let it stretch further. She stepped closer. Did you hear what I said? Perfectly, I said. That was all. Before Brooke could recalibrate, a hand came down on my shoulder, heavy and certain, the kind of hand that has carried real weight in its life. It belonged to Gerald Weston, 74 years old, my neighbor for 26 years, a man who had served 2 tours and has never once in our friendship said anything he didn't mean. He looked at Brooke the way a man looks at weather he's decided not to let ruin his day. Give him space, Gerald said. She held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds, decided the math wasn't in her favor, and walked away toward Marcus's car, never looking back. Gerald guided me toward his pickup truck. I expected him to drive home, to the repast tables, and the covered dishes, and the well-meaning neighbors. He did not drive home. He merged onto I-10 heading east, into the old industrial corridor past the port facilities, where the city turns into faded brick and forgetting. 40 minutes. Not a word between us. The wipers kept their rhythm. We pulled into a crumbling lot behind a long, low warehouse. New padlock on an old door. Gerald reached into his jacket. Eleanor came to my house 6 weeks ago, he said. His voice was controlled, but only barely. Right after the oncologist told her about her brain, she could barely walk. She wouldn't let me call you. He held out the key. She made me swear, Leonard. She said, bring him here directly from the cemetery. Marcus cannot know about this place. Not yet. Not until he understands what he's dealing with. I took the key. My hands were steady. Inside my chest, something very old was recognizing something very new, the way your body responds to a threat before your mind has finished processing it. I walked to the padlock. The key turned smoothly. I lifted the door, found the light switch in the dark. The fluorescent lights took a moment to commit. Then, row by row, they came on. I stopped breathing. The entire back wall of that warehouse was covered in cork panels, floor to ceiling, completely plastered in documents, banking records, printed email threads, highlighted transfer receipts, surveillance photographs, legal filings all connected by thin red string into a constellation of devastating precision. In the center, under a single focused work light that Eleanor had installed with her own hands, was a large photograph of Brooke, smiling, standing in front of a building with the Meridian Capital Ventures logo on the glass. On a metal desk below the corkboard sat a voice recorder, strip of white tape, my name in her handwriting, the handwriting I had been reading for 43 years, on birthday cards and grocery lists and the margins of student essays she brought home from school. I picked it up. I pressed play. Her voice was thinner than I remembered from even a month before. The cancer had been working on her lungs, but her clarity untouched. That magnificent, precise mind. Untouched. My love, if you're listening, I'm already gone, and you're standing in my war room. I need you to understand why I kept this from you. A breath shallow, labored, fighting. I knew if I told you, you would take over, and I needed to do this myself. I needed to leave you something that could keep fighting after I couldn't. I closed my eyes. Brooke is stealing from Marcus. Not small things, everything. The platform he's been building, MedLogic, the AI diagnostic system she's been forging his signature on transfer documents for months. The intellectual property is moving piece by piece into a shell company belonging to a man named Drake Whitfield. He runs Meridian Capital Ventures here in Houston. He told Marcus that MedLogic lacked commercial viability. He didn't reject it because it was weak, Leonard. He rejected it because he was already stealing it. Another pause. They're together. Have been for over 2 years. She thinks I didn't know. She thought I was just a quiet woman making cobbler and watching game shows. 3 full seconds of silence. Show her what I actually was. Show her what you actually are. Dig up who you used to be. Don't hold anything back. A soft click. The warehouse returned to silence. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Because if you have ever lost someone who kept a wound private so that you could keep living fully, if you have ever discovered, after the fact, that someone you loved was carrying a weight they chose to carry alone, rather than burden you with it, then you understand what that warehouse felt like. It wasn't just grief. It wasn't just fury. It was something I don't have a single word for. Something that grief and fury and love and professional cold precision All become when they're occupying the same body at the same time. I packed the key documents into my coat. I locked the warehouse. I walked back to Gerald's truck, and we drove home in a silence that had changed its entire character. The auditor was awake, and he had work to do. That same night, at midnight, I retrieved the biometric case from beneath the false bottom of my bedroom closet, encrypted laptops, burner phones, surveillance equipment not available through any retail channel, and contacted Raymond Cross, a former FinCEN colleague who now ran a private financial intelligence firm in Midtown Houston. Raymond already had a file. Eleanor had reached him 8 months earlier. She'd sent him her initial banking records and asked him to build from there. He had. The next morning, Brooke walked into my living room and began inventorying Eleanor's porcelain cabinet with a clipboard man at her side. I sat in my armchair and watched her point at 40 years of my wife's careful collecting and say the words, "estate lot," without a flicker of hesitation. I kept my face soft, unfocused, the expression of a man whose mind is perhaps not fully present. I was cataloging every word she said. That afternoon she produced legal documents, medical and financial power of attorney. She placed them in front of me while Marcus stood behind her, exhausted and grieving and entirely deceived. He said, "Dad, please, just sign them. It's for your safety." I reached for my pen. It looked like a fine antique heavy silver, elegant. It had been issued to me in 1998 by my department's covert operations unit. The ink it contained was a thermochromic compound. Within 36 hours of application, it would become entirely transparent. Every signature I placed on those documents was already scheduled to disappear. I signed, every page, looking small and defeated and confused. Brooke snatched the documents before the ink was dry. That was her first fatal mistake. That evening, wearing a second-hand work uniform from a thrift store on Bissonnet, I pushed a janitor's cart through the lobby of Meridian Capital's downtown tower. The security guard glanced up, saw an old black man with a mop, looked back at his phone. Here is the thing about invisibility, that nobody who has never experienced it can fully understand. When you are an older black man in certain rooms in this country, corporate lobbies, high-rise reception areas, exclusive event spaces, people look through you. They rearrange their perception of the room to exclude you. They have decided, before you've spoken a word, that you are background scenery. For most men in most situations, that is a wound. It sits in the body. It costs something. But if you know how to use it, if you have spent 17 years learning to be precisely, deliberately, strategically invisible, it is the most powerful tool in the room. I took the service elevator to the 14th floor, bypassed the executive suite's lock in 11 seconds, placed a kinetic-powered listening device the size of a shirt button beneath the mahogany lip of Drake Whitfield's desk, wiped down the glass surfaces. Left. I was back in my truck in under 40 minutes. 2 hours later, parked 3 blocks from my own house. Headphones pressed to my ears in the dark, I listened as Drake confirmed with his legal team that the MedLogic patent transfer was complete. The unveiling was Friday night, Meridian Capital's annual Houston Innovation Summit at the Grand Meridian Hotel. Drake Whitfield was going to stand on a spotlit stage and present my son's 5 years of work as his company's crowning achievement. Then Brooke called him. Her voice came through the recording warm and loose, the voice of someone celebrating privately. "It's done, Drake." The old man signed everything. He cried a little. It was almost embarrassing, a low, satisfied laugh. By Friday night, we'll have his house under contract and his accounts transferred. And you'll be on stage with the most important medical AI platform this city has ever seen. I sat in the dark car and did not move for a full minute. My concentration broke at 11 that night. The burner phone on the metal desk lit up with a video call. The name on the screen was Marcus. I took a slow breath. I set down the banking records. I let the cold, analytical energy of the federal investigator fade back behind my eyes, and I softened my face into something warmer and slower before I answered. My son looked like a man who had been carrying something much too heavy for much too long. He was sitting in his laboratory, the small commercial space he rented on the southwest side of the city, surrounded by server racks and half-assembled hardware and stacks of unpaid invoices. The overhead lighting was harsh and unflattering, and under it, Marcus looked older than his 38 years. His eyes were swollen, his collar was open. Behind him on a whiteboard, I could see the architecture diagram for MedLogic, the platform he had been building for 5 years. The one that bore his fingerprints on every single line of code. The one that was, at that very moment, sitting in Drake Whitfield's corporate portfolio under a different name. "Hey, Dad." His voice had the particular flatness of a man who has been trying to hold himself together and is no longer entirely succeeding. "You doing okay?" "I'm all right, son. Just a quiet night. How are you?" He let out a sound that was supposed to be a laugh and wasn't. "Dad, I don't understand what's happening to me. The company accounts are bleeding out, and I can't find where the money is going. I've gone through the books 4 times. The numbers don't add up, and I'm the one who built the accounting system, so that shouldn't be possible." He rubbed his face with both hands. "Brooke says the market is just tough right now. She says maybe I should consider selling the patent to a larger firm before I go completely bankrupt. Cut my losses." Every word was a blade, finding a gap in my composure. "I want to tell you what it costs to sit still and say nothing when your child is describing, without knowing it, the exact mechanism of his own destruction. When the person doing the destroying is someone he trusts completely, someone sleeping under his roof, someone he has been defending against his own quiet instincts for years. There is a specific kind of grief in watching someone you love be deceived by someone they love. It does not make a sound. It just sits in your chest and applies pressure. I knew I could not tell him the truth. Not yet. If I told Marcus everything that night, he would confront Brooke immediately. She would panic, destroy what evidence she could, wire the remaining money offshore, and disappear, leaving my son with $200,000 in fraudulent debt, a stolen platform, and a broken heart with no legal recourse. The trap had to be sealed before the prey knew it existed. "Marcus." I kept my voice steady. "Listen to me carefully. You are not failing. You are being failed, and those are 2 entirely different things. Do not sign anything. Do not sell anything. Do not make a single major decision until the end of this week." I looked at my boy through the small screen, this child I had left, a federal career to protect, this brilliant man who still didn't know that his mother had spent her dying months fighting for him from a cold warehouse. "Can you give me until Friday?" He looked at the floor for a long moment. Then he looked back up. "Okay, Dad, Friday." His voice cracked on the word, just slightly. "I love you. I love you, son. More than you know." I ended the call and placed the phone on the desk. The sadness in my chest lasted exactly 45 seconds. Then it compressed itself into something harder and colder and entirely purposeful, the way water becomes ice when the temperature drops far enough. I picked the banking records back up. There was still work to do. The next morning I walked into First Gulf Reserve Bank in a faded cardigan and scuffed shoes. The receptionist at the marble desk explained slowly the way some people speak to someone they've already decided isn't quite following, that the managing director of corporate accounts did not see walk-in clients. I placed a slip of paper with a 9-digit routing number on the counter and asked her to run it through the secure terminal. 30 seconds later, her expression had changed entirely. 8 minutes after that, I was standing in the corner office of Harrison Caldwell, First Gulf's managing director, a man in his 50s who had just canceled lunch with a state senator and was visibly unhappy about it. He looked at me with barely contained contempt. Then I placed my federal credentials on his desk. The clearance level was one that Harrison Caldwell recognized immediately, because he had spent a decade doing compliance work for institutions that had been investigated by agencies answering to exactly that division. The color left his face slowly, like a tide going out. I explained, without rushing, that Drake Whitfield had been funneling fraudulently obtained funds through his commercial accounts for 26 months, that his bank had been used to launder proceeds from forged transfers, predatory fraudulent loans taken out in a third party's name, and the theft of registered intellectual property, that this made him a potential co-respondent in a federal wire fraud investigation, unless he chose right now to be something else. Harrison Caldwell chose to be something else. Within 2 hours, Drake Whitfield's accounts were under a silent federal freeze, and I threw a certified transfer representing 43 years of quiet, compounded savings, a fortune built in modesty and never displayed, never flaunted, never mentioned to a single soul outside my marriage, purchased Drake Whitfield's entire outstanding corporate debt from the bank at a premium, $5.2 million. I was now his sole creditor. The moment his accounts defaulted, which was now mathematically inevitable, every asset of Meridian Capital Ventures, including the stolen MedLogic platform, would revert to my holding entity. I named the entity the Eleanor Trust. She would have found that satisfying. Friday arrived. Brooke left that morning with a kiss on Marcus's forehead and a story about a client pitch in Dallas. The moment his car turned off the street, she turned to me with her real face hard and triumphant, and told me the medical transport would arrive at 6 a.m., that she had installed a commercial bolt on my bedroom door from the outside, that by morning I'd be dehydrated and disoriented enough, that the psychiatric evaluation would be a formality. She locked the door. She drove away. The lock took me 9 seconds. At 7 that evening I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, in a suit I had not worn in 15 years. Dark charcoal pinstripe, custom made in London during an international fraud investigation that took me through 4 countries in 11 months. It still fit me perfectly. I adjusted a deep burgundy tie, picked up a plain brown envelope sealed with a metal clasp, and walked out of my house. I took a cab to the Grand Meridian. The ballroom was exactly what I'd expected. Crystal chandeliers. 500 of Houston's wealthiest individuals beneath a digital banner reading, Meridian Capital Pioneering the Future of Medical A. On a lit pedestal near the stage, the MedLogic prototype, Marcus's 5 years. His soul, under spotlights as though it had always belonged to someone else. I walked in without slowing. I want to be honest with you. I had planned this moment for 4 days. I had run every variable. And still walking into that room, seeing my son's life's work displayed like a trophy on someone else's mantle, something in my chest tightened in a way no amount of preparation could have prevented. I breathed through it. The auditor breathed through it. And I kept walking. Brooke was near the center of the room, silver gown, her hand on Drake Whitfield's arm. She was laughing at something. She looked genuinely happy. The happiness of someone who believes they have already won. She turned her head and saw me. The glass stopped moving. Her face went through several expressions very quickly, ending somewhere between disbelief and animal terror. She crossed the room like a storm front. Drake materialized behind her, slower, with the practiced confidence of a man who has managed problems before. "Service corridor," Drake said. "Not a request." The 3 of us walked through the heavy wooden doors. The corridor was cold and fluorescent and empty. Drake leaned against the wall with the posture of a man who expects to be obeyed. Brooke positioned herself between us, vibrating with fury and fear in equal measure. "You have 30 seconds, Drake said, before security removes you, and the evening continues without interruption." I looked at Drake Whitfield for a long moment. I looked at Brooke. I held out the brown envelope. She took it. Her hands were trembling, though she was fighting to hide it. She tore the seal open and reached inside, expecting deeds and legal surrender, expecting the final capitulation of a broken old man. The first document her fingers found bore the official seal of the United States Department of the Treasury and the letterhead of the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Her full legal name, a list of charges: wire fraud, identity theft, corporate espionage, conspiracy to unlawfully deprive an elderly individual of legal autonomy. She made no sound. The second document was the certified debt transfer Drake's entire corporate liability, now held by the Eleanor Trust. The third was an active federal arrest warrant bearing both their names, signed by a federal judge. Brooke's fingers went slack. The documents scattered across the concrete floor in a slow, almost graceful cascade. She did not try to catch them. She slid down the wall. I did not move toward her. I did not speak. I simply stood and watched the color leave her face the way dawn leaves the sky gradually, completely, until there was nothing left but a kind of bleak and terrible gray. Drake scrambled forward. He snatched up the first document he could reach. Read it. His eyes moved fast at first, with the frantic scanning of a man looking for an error, a loophole, something he had misunderstood. Then the scanning stopped. His eyes stopped moving entirely. He was reading the debt transfer agreement. I watched his brain process it. I had watched men process catastrophic financial news many times in my career, and there is a specific physical sequence it follows. First the eyes stop, then the breathing changes, then the hands. Drake's hands began to shake approximately 4 seconds after his eyes stopped moving. "You bought my debt," he said. The voice that came out was not the voice of the man who had been holding court in the ballroom 20 minutes ago. It was thin, fractured. "You bought my entire company. The bank sold you everything." He looked up from the floor. He looked at my polished shoes and traveled up, slowly, to my face. "Who are you?" I reached up with both hands and straightened my tie, adjusted the lapels of the charcoal pinstripe suit. I looked at the man who had looked at my son's life's work and decided to simply take it, because he had always taken what he wanted and no one had ever made him pay the price. "I am the husband of Eleanor Okafor," I said. She was a high school English teacher. She spent the last 2 years of her life building this case from an industrial warehouse on the east side of this city, while cancer was actively destroying her brain. She gathered every document you see on that floor. She mapped every wire transfer. She contacted my former colleagues in federal financial intelligence and gave them the evidence they needed to authorize this investigation. I paused. She did all of this while she was dying. She did it so that I would have exactly what I needed on exactly this night. I looked at him without any emotion I was willing to show. She was considerably smarter than both of you, and she was considerably more patient. Drake stared at me. Something was happening behind his eyes, the specific, sickening moment when a man who has spent his entire life operating on arrogance and impunity suddenly understands that the ground beneath him is not solid, that it was never solid, that he was standing on a surface someone else controlled, and simply didn't know it. Then he turned to Brooke. The switch was instantaneous. The terror became fury. The fury found its target. "You told me he was helpless." Drake's voice came out jagged, stripped of every rehearsed quality. "You told me he was a confused old man who couldn't manage his own finances. You told me this was going to be clean." He stepped toward her, his fists tight at his sides. "You brought a federal investigator into my bank accounts. You walked a federal executioner through my front door and handed him a key." Brooke pressed herself harder against the wall. "Drake, please, we can fix this. We can call your legal team." "There is no legal team." His voice rose. "There is no fixing this. My accounts are frozen. My company belongs to this man. The patent we spent 2 years acquiring is sitting in his wife's trust fund, and his wife is dead." His voice broke on the last word, not with grief, but with the particular anguish of a man whose plan has been dismantled so completely that even his anger has nowhere useful to go. "You looked at an old black man in a cardigan and you decided he was invisible. And you pulled me into your delusion. And now we are both going to federal prison because of your arrogance." Brooke made a sound I don't have a precise word for. It was somewhere between a sob and a gasp, the sound of a person whose last remaining support has just been removed. She looked at the man she had chosen over her husband, the man she had committed crimes for, the man who had promised her a life of unearned luxury. He was standing over her, ready to throw her to every federal agency with jurisdiction just to shave years off his own sentence. Something in her face shifted, not into sadness, into something rawer and more dangerous. The heavy wooden doors burst open. The federal task force came through in a wave of dark uniforms, tactical boots, the radio chatter of coordinated law enforcement filling the corridor like white noise. 2 agents had Drake pinned against the wall before he'd processed they were in the room. A third reached for Brooke. She didn't go quietly. What followed was not the elegant collapse of a sophisticated criminal. It was something much more primal, a woman who had spent years performing perfect control, finally losing every piece of it at once. She fought the agent's grip. She screamed, not words, exactly sounds. The sounds of someone who has just watched everything they gambled on dissolve in front of them and cannot locate a single exit. The heavy doors opened wider. They were dragged back through the ballroom. Not the service exit. The main floor past the crystal chandeliers and the silver trays and the 500 stunned faces of Houston's wealthiest individuals, past the lit pedestal where Marcus's prototype still sat under its spotlight, past the digital banner reading Meridian Capital Pioneering the Future of Medical A, which 3 different news cameras were already filming. The room was absolutely silent as they were escorted through it. Then the smartphones went up. Every one of them. Through the open ballroom doors, I saw my son walk in. I had sent Marcus a message 3 hours earlier. 1 line. "Come to the Grand Meridian at 9. Come alone. Don't say anything to Brooke." He stood in the corridor and saw everything. The photographed surveillance images of Brooke and Drake that required no explanation. The banking records showing his own social security number taken out in $200,000 of loans he had never authorized. The patent transfer documents, his own name, erased from his own creation. Marcus was very still for a very long time. Then he reached into his jacket and removed an envelope of his own. Divorce papers, filed that afternoon. Restraining order already active. My mother sent me an encrypted message, he said. His voice was low and level. She said it on a delay scheduled to arrive in my inbox 36 hours after her death. She wanted me to have time to grieve before I had to be angry. He looked at Brooke with an expression I will carry with me for the rest of my life. She saw you clearly. She saw all of it, and she made sure we would too. Brooke was arrested on the floor of the service corridor while 500 of Houston's most powerful people watched through the open ballroom doors with their phones raised. Drake was cuffed against the wall, his velvet tuxedo in disarray, the architectural confidence entirely gone from his face. They were dragged through the center of the grand ballroom past the chandeliers and the champagne and the people who had been toasting them 20 minutes earlier and pushed out through the brass front doors into waiting, federal vehicles. The trap was empty. The hunt was over. The call came at 7:15 2 mornings later. An automated voice told me I had a collect call from the Harris County Federal Detention Center. I accepted the charges. Leonard. Her voice was almost unrecognizable. The confidence had been removed from it so completely that what remained was just a thin, frightened sound. The voice of someone who has been alone in a small room with their own thoughts for 48 hours and has not liked what they found there. Leonard, please. You have to listen to me. I looked out the kitchen window at Eleanor's rose bushes along the south fence. I'm listening, I said. I know what I did was wrong. The words came fast, rehearsed. I know I hurt your family. I know I hurt Marcus. But I am begging you, please call the prosecutor's office. Please tell them you want to drop the charges. You have the power to do that. You have enough money to make this go away, Leonard. I saw the transfer documents. I know what you have. I thought about Eleanor in the warehouse. Weak enough that Gerald had to drive her there. Eyes burning, he had told me. Terrifying kind of fire. Drake is testifying against me, Brooke continued, her voice fracturing. He's telling them I planned everything. He's saying he didn't know the funds were fraudulent. After everything I gave up for him, he is going to stand in a courtroom and let me take the fall alone. A sound that might have been a sob. I have no one, Leonard. I have nothing. Please. Brooke, I said. Do you remember Eleanor? A pause. Of course I do. She baked you a peach cobbler the first Christmas you spent with our family. You didn't eat it. You said you were watching your sugar intake. I kept my voice even. She baked it anyway. Because she was the kind of woman who believed the gesture mattered even when it wasn't received well. She kept believing that about you for 4 years. She kept hoping you would become someone she didn't have to protect her son from. I looked out at the yellow roses. I'm not calling the prosecutor's office. What happens next happens. Because you made choices. Eleanor made choices too. The difference is what those choices were for. I paused. I hope the time gives you a chance to think about that honestly. That's the kindest thing I have left to offer you. I placed the receiver back on the wall. I had barely set the phone down when I heard tires on Delaney Street. A large white SUV came down the block faster than the speed limit and parked across my driveway in a single aggressive motion. 2 people got out before the engine had finished settling a man and a woman in their late 60s, country club clothes, the particular posture of people who have never in their lives been made to wait for anything. Thomas and Cecilia Hargrove, Brooke's parents. I had met them 4 times in 4 years of marriage. Each time they had managed to communicate, without saying it directly, that they considered the Okafor family an obstacle their daughter had unwisely chosen to attach herself to. I stepped out onto the porch before they reached the door. Thomas was red-faced in the way that certain men get when they are frightened and have decided to express it as aggression. He pointed up at me before he'd reached the bottom step. You need to tell us exactly what you did to our daughter. We got a call from her attorney this morning and I want answers. Cecilia was shaking her head with the continuous, dismissive motion of a woman who has decided the situation is beneath her. We know what you did. You fabricated evidence to steal her company and have her arrested. We have attorneys. We will sue you for malicious prosecution. We will have this entire case reopened. I let them finish. Then I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and removed a thin leather folder. Your daughter transferred $68,000 into your personal checking account 14 months ago. I said, holding up the first document so they could see the bank seal clearly in the morning sunlight. You used $31,000 of it to purchase a recreational boat, currently docked at your lake property in Conroe. The remaining $37,000 was applied to your private club membership fees. I held up the second document. Under federal asset forfeiture law, Any property purchased with funds that originated from a fraudulent source is subject to government seizure. These are not my documents, Thomas. They belong to the federal task force. The only question is whether I hand them over this morning, or whether you turn around, get in your car, and allow the investigation to proceed without your names becoming part of the public record. The red left Thomas Hargrove's face. What replaced it was something older and smaller. Cecilia had stopped shaking her head. Neither of them said anything. Thomas reached back and found his wife's arm. They turned and walked back to their SUV with the careful movements of people who have just been told the ground is unstable and are trying to reach solid footing without running. The vehicle backed out of my driveway and drove away down Delaney Street. I went inside and finished my coffee. The sentencing hearing was held on a gray Tuesday morning in February at the federal courthouse on Rusk Street. I sat in the back row wearing my comfortable old cardigan. I did not need to wear the suit. The auditor's work was finished. I was just Leonard again. Drake Whitfield stood before the federal judge in a standard-issue jumpsuit. He had cooperated with the prosecution, had handed Brooke over with the same detachment with which he had handled every human being who had served his purposes, and outlived their usefulness. The judge sentenced him to 9 years. He wept when she said it. I watched him weep and felt nothing particular. There is a kind of grief that is really just the grief of consequence, the shock of a man discovering that the world has been keeping a record all along. I had seen it many times in my career. It never moved me. Brooke stood next. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, she was the same woman. But something had left her in the months between the gala and the courthouse, some fundamental certainty about her own position in the world that she had clearly never questioned before and was now never going to recover. The judge looked down at her for a long, unhurried moment before speaking. The court finds particularly egregious, the judge said, the deliberate targeting of an elderly individual for the purposes of legal incapacitation. The defendant did not simply commit financial fraud. She attempted to erase a person to have him declared incompetent, institutionalized, and stripped of his legal identity in order to facilitate theft. This court does not treat that lightly. 8 years. Full restitution. She did not look at me when they let her out. Marcus, sitting beside me in the gallery, exhaled slowly through his nose. He had not spoken during the entire proceeding. He reached over and placed his hand briefly on my arm. I covered it with mine. We sat there for a moment after the room began to empty. 2 men in a quiet courthouse, thinking about a woman who had loved us both enough to wage a 2-year war from a warehouse while she was dying. The months that followed moved with the slow certainty of consequence finding its proper address. The MedLogic platform, fully recovered and re-registered under Marcus's name through the Eleanor Trust, launched at a press event in downtown Houston 4 months later. Marcus stood at the podium and thanked his mother first. He held it together for about 15 seconds. Then he didn't. Nobody in the room minded. On a Sunday morning in late March, I drove to Riverside Memorial Cemetery for the second time. The first time, I had stood in freezing rain over fresh earth with nothing but grief and a dangerous stillness. This time, the sky was the particular blue that follows a long season of difficult weather, clear and honest, the kind of blue that asks nothing of you and offers everything. The oak trees along the cemetery's main path were beginning to show their first green. The grass was soft under my feet. I carried a single white camellia, Eleanor's favorite. She had kept a small pot of them on the kitchen windowsill for 30 years, and I had never once, in all that time, thought to ask her why that specific flower. I thought about it now. I thought about it often, all the small questions I had left unasked, because I assumed we would have more time for them. That is the particular cruelty of losing someone slowly. You see it coming, and still somehow you don't ask the questions. You tell yourself there is more time. There wasn't. I knelt at the headstone. My knees reminded me of my age, as they reliably do now, and I let them. The Eleanor Trust closed its primary function last week, I told her. The MedLogic patent is fully registered under Marcus's name. The shell company Drake used has been dissolved. Every fraudulent transfer has been reversed or seized. Raymond sends his regards, by the way. He said, and I'm quoting him directly, that you were a better forensic investigator than half the people he trained with at Treasury. He said he knew it the first time you called him. I placed the camellia at the base of the stone. I thought you should hear that. The wind moved through the oak trees above me. I listened to it for a while. Marcus came for dinner last Thursday. He brought food from that Ethiopian place on Westheimer that you always wanted to try, and we never got around to. He stayed until 10 o'clock. We sat on the porch and he played music from his phone, and we didn't talk about any of it. Not the trial, not Brooke, not Drake, not the company. We just sat there. I rested my palm against the warm granite of the headstone. It felt like before. Not exactly like before. Nothing will feel exactly like before, but close enough that I could breathe through it. I thought about the warehouse on the east side of the city, the cork panels and the red string and the silver recorder with my name in her handwriting. I thought about the image of Eleanor in pain, barely able to walk, refusing Gerald's offer to call me sitting alone in that cold building with highlighted bank statements and a deep, clear conviction about what needed to be done. I keep thinking about what it cost you, I said quietly. Not the physical cost, though I think about that too, but the choice, the decision to carry it alone rather than put it on me. To protect the shape of our last months together by keeping the weight of it off the table between us. My voice was steady. I had practiced being steady for a long time. That is the most remarkable thing I have ever witnessed, Eleanor. And I have witnessed some things. I stayed for a long time. The sun moved through the trees and the shadows shifted around me, and I let the quiet of the place do its work. Grief, I have come to understand, is not something you finish. It is something you learn to carry without letting it collapse you. Eleanor taught me that by example, by demonstration, in the most dramatic terms possible. Eventually I stood up, smoothed my cardigan, and walked back to the truck. On the way home, I stopped at the farmer's market on Westheimer. I bought tomato seedlings and a small pot of white camellias. I planted the camellias along the south fence when I got home, next to where Eleanor's yellow roses were already coming in strong. Here is what I keep returning to every time I sit with this story. Both Brooke and Drake built their entire strategy on a single assumption that the people they were targeting had no power. They looked at a grieving old man in a worn cardigan and decided he was finished. They looked at a woman dying in a hospital room and decided she was irrelevant. That assumption wasn't just wrong, it was the thing that destroyed them. If you have ever been in a room where someone spoke over you, or through you, or simply chose not to see you, if you've ever been underestimated by someone who thought the packaging told them everything they needed to know, then you understand what this story is really about. Invisibility, deployed with intention, is not weakness. Patience, worn like a mask over something much sharper, is not defeat. The most dangerous chess player in the room is never the one making the loudest moves. It's the one who's already seen the end of the game. Brooke's mistake was not that she was greedy. Greed is common and survivable. Her mistake was that she let her contempt blind her. She saw what she wanted to see and stopped looking. The moment you stop truly looking at your opponent, you've already lost. You just don't know it yet. The practical thing I take from this, and I think about this for myself honestly, is this. The most powerful evidence you can gather against someone acting in bad faith is the evidence they hand you while they believe you're not watching. Don't argue. Don't confront too early. Let them perform their certainty. Let them make their moves. Let them lock the door and assume the room is empty. A wise woman once built an entire federal case from a rented warehouse, while dying, because she understood that patience executed with precision outlasts arrogance every single time. Ask yourself this before you go. Where in your life have you been underestimating the quiet ones? Before I let you go, drop a number in the comments. Type 1 if you think Leonard should have confronted Brooke sooner. Type 2 if the patient approach was absolutely the right call all along. Type 3 if you believe Eleanor was the true architect of justice in this entire story. I'll be honest, I cannot move myself off of 3, no matter how many times I return to it. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. And if you have ever been severely underestimated by someone and then proven them catastrophically wrong, I want to hear about it below. Because I have a feeling the comment section on this one is going to be worth reading. If stories like this one are what you come here for, please subscribe and hit the bell. I put everything I have into every single one of these. You being here is the whole point. This is a fictional story, inspired by real emotional experiences. Fully rewritten and reimagined in Houston, Texas to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental.